Hello and welcome to Mythmakers. Mythmakers is the podcast for fantasy fans and fantasy creatives, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. My name is Julia Golding, and today I'm doing one of my favourite things, which is talking to a fellow author. And we've got Naomi Ishiguro with us, who is just releasing the fantastic The Rainshadow Orphans. For those of you who are watching this, I'm holding up the beautiful British edition of this book. And so welcome to Mythmakers, Naomi.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening and watching, if you're watching.
It's super exciting when you get to that point where your book is just arrived through the post and you're looking at this little, well, very big in your case, your firstborn, as it is. I was wondering what the child would have thought knowing what the grown-up Naomi is facing now. And were you that kind of girl who loved books and roamed through libraries, or did you come to it late?
I definitely grew up loving books and stories, and yeah, in all forms, actually. I was very much like a Disney kid as well. I loved animation and all sorts of visual storytelling as well. So this book is very influenced by anime, specifically, but also I just wrote it like I wanted it to feel sort of animated, as if it was sort of hand drawn, maybe. I think I was sort of always captivated, and specifically by fantasy as well. I've always been a huge reader of fantasy. So yeah, I don't know, I haven't changed very much. So I think probably the child and the adult self are having like a similar response, which is just, I'm very excited, and I'm feel very lucky, and I'm excited to share it with readers.
Yeah, and for those of you who like books as, you know, the actual physical thing of books, it's a lovely edition to hold and read.
I've got the American one came in the post the other day, which I think is just so beautiful. They've got these beautiful spread edges and stunning end papers as well.
It's got a wonderful cat going down the end papers. So I think actually get the American edition, guys, if you've got access to it, because it's beautiful. Yeah. So which was the first book that you can remember having read to you or reading yourself that really lit up your imagination? What's your entry drug to this, obsession with literature?
Book that really captivated me as a child. Well, when I was thinking, I had a bit of a think about this, and actually I think the very first thing from when I was about like 2 was actually watching things rather than reading things. It was, again, animation. I loved fairy tales relayed to me, like Aladdin and things like that. Sort of became visually, I think animation is like sort of real magic in the magic in the real world. And so many of those stories kind of really are just about imagination and infinite possibility, like the magic carpet in Aladdin, the sort of that whole sequence, or the under the sea sequence in The Little Mermaid. So I think it was honestly kind of stories like that just were very transporting, because I was obviously too young to read myself. I remember having these lamps in my bedroom that had like a light bulb in the middle and then like a paper thing that would spin around because of the heat of the lamp, and it would project images on the walls, and one of them was sort of outer space things and one of them was under the sea things, which I think fits well with the Aladdin magic carpet obsession and the Little Mermaid under the sea obsession. As with books though, like I think I read like a lot and had a lot read to me, like, just the usual kind of like standard 90s British childhood, but I think possibly like Terry Pratchett was the thing that really got me kind of obsessed with like the possibilities of what you can do with fiction. I loved Mort as a child, the one that Death is the sort of actual character walking around doing things, speaking. And I think the idea that, it was the first time I'd heard the words anthropomorphic personification. I think I was about 8 or something.
And just advanced child, yes.
But the idea that you could take this kind of abstract idea that we are afraid of a lot of the time and turn it into something that maybe wasn't so fearful, or that was part of this kind of very humane kind of humanist kind of vision that the Discworld presents, I think was extremely compelling to me at the time. Yeah.
So you've had various jobs involved with, or tasks involved with literature. I noticed that you were a bookseller for a bit, and you've done various creative writing further degrees.
Yeah.
So when people pick up Rainshadow Orphans, which is the first in a series, what are they going to be entering into here?
Yeah, so it is, as I said, it's very anime inspired. It was inspired by sort of Japanese shonen anime. It's an anime inspired adventure story, sort of epic fantasy, urban fantasy, and it's very much there's a sort of heist, a slight sort of undercover spy sort of story, a bit of a revenge plot, and it's really about marginalized young people standing up for their place in society and resisting kind of injustice and corruption in all of their forms. But I've tried to make it like there is a political edge, obviously, as a lot of fantasy does have, but it's also I've tried to make it very hopeful because I feel like that is political in itself. It's like what's what's the point in just handing people despair? We have enough of that in the world. And it's fun. I wanted it to be fun for readers. I spent some time as a high school teacher, if that taught me anything, is that your lessons and the things you create to share with people, they have to be fun. So there's a funny cat and martial arts battles. There's dragons, of course. There's a cool magic system, hopefully, and lots of like entertaining snacks and lots of like found family and solidarity. So that's what you can expect.
Yeah. So your Rainshadow Orphans live on a large island, which has. The geography is quite important to the plot because the southern side of the island is where the dispossessed, the stateless individuals, the undocumented workers in that parlance live, whereas you've got an emperor who's a female emperor to start with, and the court and the privileged people who've got through the hoops to be citizens live in a sort of more privileged area, and then there's a kind of no man's land area in between. Were you thinking of any particular model of a place when you came up with that, or as like a real world society, or did it kind of just organically grow as you began to explore the world around your characters?
It very much started with theme. So I've always been interested in questions of physical space. So my first novel was actually called Common Ground, which is very on the nose and very literal, but it is about how we need more common ground, literally and physically. So space and the politics of space is something I've always been very curious about. So I think that's sort of where the kind of very like socially structured geography of the island came into the world building. But I was interested in this idea we see in so many of our societies of a society which is built on the labor and the efforts of those that it vilifies. And that is often sort of undocumented workers and people who the sort of, I guess, like majority class have decided for whatever reason kind of don't belong. So this idea of like space, belonging, and the role that sort of different kind of social groups play within society and the injustice of a lot of that was something I very much kind of wanted to write about, not from a kind of here's my polemic like I'm telling you what to think, but just kind of like raising questions about it and just exploring the dynamics of that kind of society. I didn't want to look at it's not a straight allegory for anywhere in the world particularly, because it was a specific kind of power dynamic that I wanted to examine rather to just sort of say like, oh, this is Gaza, or this is like the jungle in Calais, or like, you know, like a lot of these kind of marginalized spaces did kind of play into my head while I was writing it. But it is fundamentally like it's a fun fantasy novel. So I didn't want to get like too into making it literally a straight kind of like for like of something that was like a very live political situation. And I think that's not really, I mean, it can be fiction's role, but I'm more interested in looking at like the underlying dynamics and forces and the things that sort of societal and emotional consequences of those things really. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we often talk about C.S. Lewis and Tolkien on this podcast. And one of the things which I've always found really helpful that they talked about, which is not an allegory, but an something that's applicable to the world. So that you as a reader, I think the quote is, allegory lies in the power of the author, whereas applicability lies in the power of the reader.
Yeah.
So as someone's reading it, they may think, oh, this reminds me of something happening in America, whereas someone else is saying, oh, this reminds me of what's happening in Australia. So you apply it to your own sort of context.
Yeah, I love that. And so much of fantasy is sort of giving to the reader, like giving agency to the reader. Like you're making these magic systems and then you're sort of handing them over and saying, like, you make up your own stories you imagine in this world. Like, this world is yours now. That's intrinsic to the genre. So I love that it's finding some kind of universal or like kind of deeper truth about human societies that isn't just like that I'm not imposing on it. It's just that's what I'm aiming for anyway. I'm not sure if I've achieved that, but yeah, you're sort of aiming for this kind of a different level of truth, I guess, that you can hand over to people and say, like, interpret this in like see where this kind of fits your context and sort of read it as you like.
So was the journey to writing this a smooth, plain sailing all the way, or did you have many stops and starts? Was it actually quite a tough write?
I don't feel like anything is ever plain sailing in writing. With
That's a trap, that question.
Yeah, with listeners who, if you write, you'll know that it never is. But yeah, so I published a couple of books in the pandemic, and just the experience of that was, I mean, there were many, many, many worse things that happened to people in the pandemic. I'm definitely not complaining, but it was just very discombobulating, and I think just sort of being exposed to the industry for the first time was quite stressful. So I wanted to carry on writing. But I actually sort of decided I wasn't going to be like a career writer, and trained as a secondary school teacher and was working as a high school teacher. So I was working with teenagers for a couple of years after my first book. And that was, so my agent was, he kept me on, and he was like, you could try writing a different kind of book. Like, what have you wrote about teaching? What have you wrote nonfiction? And then he sort of said, what have you wrote for young people? Like, what have you wrote with your students in mind, like with a different audience? And I was a bit like, yeah, okay. But then I actually thought, like, yeah, what if I did sort of do, because it's not it's not a YA. It's being published as adult, but it's with the sort of, and I was teaching like up to like 18-year-olds. So, but yeah, it's sort of with my students in mind was kind of how it sort of first came into being. And yeah, I think once I decided to write it, it was actually quite not easy, but it came quite quickly, and I just found myself like very excited by the whole process, and I had a great time writing it, and it just sort of like everything kind of seemed to come together in the world. Sort of made sense, and I just had like because with fantasy you can source ideas from all sorts of different places and people, and it's just such a fun process. So it was actually kind of wonderful once I'd started, but I think that sort of sense of what am I going to write took a while. But I think that's sort of very common with writers, because once you sort of write a novel, you've sort of said everything you have to say. You pour like years of thinking into it, and then you have to sort of spend some time sort of living and gathering more thoughts and observations about the world.
Yeah. So the world building, I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but I was seeing it as having a sort of Japanese basis for the culture. And but it's not Japan. It's not our own world. I mean, obviously, once you realize there are 3 moons, you're somewhere else, which sort of frees you up from any sort of attempt to connect it. So what kind of world builder are you? Are you the sort who has loads of notebooks where you're already creating a world and then you go ahead with the story, or do you create the bit of the world that fits that bit of the narrative?
I think it's a difficult one, because I love world building just for fun. I think it's just a wonderful, like, it's a great activity.
You get stuck there, can't you? Because it's so.
And it's something quite different from writing a novel, I think. So you can create a sort of perfect fun world, and then you think, oh, it's not really in service to the story and the characters and the themes I really want to explore, because like writing a novel is really about theme. So I think, yeah, for me, like I did say that the sort of land and the sort of politics of the land was very much like came from the themes. But yeah, there's a whole kind of solar magic system that's kind of roughly based on, I guess, sort of ideas of like numinous energy flows through the world or kind of chi. And there are kind of creatures called sun spirits, who like I've invented, but are sort of based on just ideas like slightly of sort of Japanese yokai. And like the animism in the Shinto tradition of sort of kami being these sort of spirits, these gods that are sort of physically present in places. Yeah, I think with the world building, with this book, there was bits that were sort of there, and they were the ones that were in service to the theme and the characters. And then I sort of wrote the draft, sort of getting the story. And then I had sort of three friends who ended up sort of helping a lot. Three kind of beta readers, I guess. One of them was just a sort of amazing literary novelist who read a draft and was sort of questioning some of the politics of it, sort of being like, okay, so how does this island's economy really, really function? You've said that it kind of runs on these, the labor of these like undocumented migrants who are in this sort of like almost refugee camp, but like, how does that actually work? Like what? Like, and what is the role of this gang, the Lucky Crows that you have? Like, what are the actual kind of mechanics of injustice here? Like, let's draw that out a bit more. Yeah, and sort of looked at sort of the history of the island and that kind of thing with me. And that sort of solidified that. I have a friend who's a professional theoretical physicist, which is always handy for a fantasy.
Yeah.
So great to have one of those on speed dial.
Exactly.
So like I asked him about the magic system and just being like, so is this logical? Like, does this make sense in terms of like some kind of physics? And sometimes the answer would be yes, and sometimes like, no, not quite, but what if you did this? And that was really fun just to throw around ideas and to get ideas for like future books of like just kind of things that could happen that may never, like we did a lot of just kind of co-world building that may never actually end up in the books, but was really fun as an activity. So that did make me think it's quite dangerous. You can just world build infinitely. And yeah, I have a friend who has an MST in Japanese studies from Oxford, which despite me being half Japanese, I definitely don't have that. So she read through the book and just kind of gave me more advice on the cultural aspects, because it does borrow quite a lot from Japanese sort of culture and tradition. So she was sort of my cultural advisor. So I think with fantasy, it's great because you get to draw on the expertise of the people around you. And yeah, my previous books felt very much like me on my own, like this is just me. Whereas this has felt like I've written it, but it feels very much like a kind of team effort of me just going around and sourcing like interesting people and having interesting conversations. And there's definitely like more like research, experiential research that has gone into building this world, definitely.
Yeah, I've got a friend who is a primary care doctor in the developing world, so he goes into the kind of places that, like Yemen and Somalia and, places that you wouldn't go on holiday at the moment. But he's very helpful because if I say, what happens if you get bitten by a cobra? What happens if you get hit by a sword? What really happens, as opposed to like fantasy, film violence.
Yeah.
What kind of infections might you have after? Sort of, and unfortunately, he knows because of the nature of where he works. So he often gets a dedication and a thanks. But I wanted to point out, or just raise with you, that your dragons are Eastern ones. So tell us a little bit about your dragons, because I think there'll be anyone who loves dragons, if you hang on in the book, because they come.
Yeah, you've got to have dragons. I think that was one of the things. I was like, if I'm writing a fantasy novel, like there has to be dragons. Yeah, it's like, naturally. Yeah, it was very important to me that they were Eastern dragons. I love Western dragons. I mean, I was one of those people that did Old English at university and just loved all the, like grew up reading Tolkien, like, the dragon and Beowulf and all the idea of the kind of worms and like Smaug. And like, I very much kind of like grew up in that tradition, but I was also very much aware that there was a kind of very different kind of idea of what a dragon was, that was an Eastern dragon. And I didn't see growing up anyway, so many of them in fantasy fiction, because it was always these kind of big winged kind of, I don't know, Smaug-like creatures. And yeah, I just wanted, because it's a kind of Eastern archipelago, and that's sort of the world. I like the idea of dragons that sort of have control over the weather. I love the story of the dragon pearl, the idea of dragons being associated with water, and because there's the magic system is all about kind of elemental flows of energy, like the kind of weather and that kind of thing seem to work very well within the context of the story. But I think some of it's just kind of like representation, like when you work with young people, and it just sort of made me reflect on like there weren't that many kind of Eastern skewed fantasy worlds like for me when I was growing up, so I just kind of wanted to make one, and there's plenty now, there's loads, but
Yeah, no, but it's probably
contribute.
probably will still feel fresh to a reader, and anyone who's perhaps felt they've been glutted on Western style dragons. It'll be lovely refreshment to find another series of legends and traditions informing your characters. So you have, I noticed, I think I've got this right. You've got 5 main points of view. You've got Toshiko, who we start with, who's the younger of 3 siblings. Her brother Jun,
Yeah.
who is a very good cook,
Yeah.
and sort of caring for the family figure. And you got May, sorry, who's the eldest, or the elder sister, who's the sort of computer whiz who prefers to stay at home. She's that kind of person. And then you've got Haru, who is the young son of the emperor, only child. And then you've got Theo, who is an outsider who seems to have come from what we would normally think of as a Western background. In he's got sort of fair hair and blue eyes, and so he's the outsider in this world. So, who walked into your imagination first?
I think the sisters, Toshiko and May, I imagine, because I was teaching at a girls' grammar school, I think this idea of, I mean, that my characters aren't quite teenagers. Toshiko is 17 and May is 21. But it was sort of the idea of these 2 sisters, essentially, who they kind of bicker, and they're very different. Toshiko is very, like, she goes out and she knows martial arts, and she'll, fight the bad guys and go on the heists and have the adventures. And May is very much an introvert. And yeah, she has a different skill set completely, and she's very sarcastic, and stays at home with a very grumpy cat, Mochi. So yeah, I think it was, I just kind of loved the idea of their kind of sister bond, and like what they kind of learn from each other and how they complete each other, I guess. And I just love the idea of these 2 sisters in this kind of almost like cyberpunk world. That I just had the aesthetic of it. I was like, yeah, it's a sister story. And then it actually kind of built out from there. I think I liked the idea of writing a trio. I'm not quite sure why, but it just sort of made sense. And having the three siblings. And often I didn't really do this consciously, but it must have been an unconscious thing. I think often in anime you do get, it's almost like a trope, having 5 main characters. Like a gang of 5. So I think maybe that was sort of how it just like it felt naturally right for me. May isn't such a point of view character. She only has one section from her point of view. So it doesn't, if readers are thinking, oh God, that sounds like it's going to jump around a lot and be sort of difficult to read. Toshiko is our main point of view. So it's often like the perspective will alternate to another character and then go back to Toshiko and then another character and go. So you are kind of grounded in this one sort of central POV character that carries you through. But I liked the idea of, also, like, it's very much a story about the importance of like a collectivist view. It sort of kicks against individualism, I suppose. And I think there are so many like amazing fantasy stories about like the chosen one and the individual like succeeding and going off and self-actualizing. And that's one thing. And I love a lot of those stories. But I think one of the main things I like to look at in my writing is the importance of society and the kind of things we owe to each other, and a more collectivist kind of sense of how we kind of move forward as people. So I think having this kind of ensemble rather than just a kind of one main character was important to me for that reason as well.
Did you find yourself having a favorite?
Well, Toshiko is like your main, she's sort of the anchor. So I really enjoyed writing her as well because she's a very like active character. She is very impulsive. She doesn't always make the most sensible decisions. So she dives headfirst into things like often quite reactively, just being like, oh, like I'm angry, I need to go out and do something. And then it will create some kind of disaster, but then she has to sort of deal with it. So that was quite exciting as a writer, to have someone who is sort of always wanting to take action and go out and do things, rather than necessarily like do the sensible thing that like we might actually do in real life. And I think because she's young, like it felt true to the kids I was working with as well, who often would just kind of do things first and then consider the why of it later. So I loved her, but I liked writing Haru a lot. The young prince, he's a very sweet character, and I think a lot of the
he's the most pure in heart, isn't he?
yeah, and actually a lot of the emotional heart of the book comes from him, and he has a sort of found family relationship with this woman who's sort of effectively like his nanny, called Kay. And I think writing his his emotional story was something that I think felt like it added a kind of slightly deeper layer to the book. Yeah.
So I would say that I found May the hardest to like, but I suspect that's on purpose, because you need to have, the fact that you do sort of like her, but she is the hardest to love, because she is prickly. That's the way she works. So were you thinking about that, of actually having a bit of grist in the meal? Otherwise, if you have lots of characters all kind of sweet,
Yeah.
you need the one who is the awkward squad one, don't you? Really?
Oh, definitely. And like you don't want characters who are all just kind of uncomplicatedly blandly lovely. You want them to have a bit of like realness to them. Actually, it's interesting you say that, because a lot of people have told me May's their favorite. Actually, the one that gets mentioned the most often as being a favorite amongst like people who read it. So that is, I think people react to her differently. Maybe she's just the strongest flavor.
It should be an age thing, because I like, maybe it's kind of like maternally, I liked Haru because he was sweet.
Yeah.
Whereas I imagine if May was my daughter, I'd be putting my hair out.
I mean, Haru is he is quite I don't know, he's quite like
He goes missing quite a lot. That would worry me.
I mean, again, his decision making isn't, because he at the beginning he's so sheltered, everything's sort of a game to him. So he isn't sort of the wisest. He can be a bit of a loose cannons. He's not just sweet, but
actually, Jun is really sweet. I mean, as a grown up, you could see that Haru could be like him growing up. So definitely.
Jun is just lovely. He just cooks pancakes for everyone, and is just he cares. He's the caring role. Yeah, May came about though because I was teaching these grammar school girls, and they were like really cool. Like they were really like, I just thought they were like really awesome. But they were also like massive like nerds, in the sense of like when I was at school, people would be like, oh, you do robotics, like you do computer programming, like, oh, such a nerd. But they were just like really kind of like effortlessly cool. And I felt like we don't see, and a lot of them, they might not have been into computers, but they'd be into reading, or like they were just very like academic and quite introverted, but still like that wasn't seen as like an uncool thing. And I just sort of wanted a character who was cool, like a teenager, or like a slightly like a young person, but who also was who like solved problems with her intellect, and was like preferred to stay at home with her thoughts and her computers. And that was sort of where that came from. But also she's quite a traumatized character.
I think that's more like what I was picking up on, is that she
keeps people at a distance. She even has these long acrylic nails that are almost like claws. Cat that sits around her shoulders that will kind of like claw at anyone who gets too close. So I think that's where her prickliness is sort of meant to, like she has to sort of protect herself. Like she's quite spiky, and she's actually quite fearful of the outside world as well.
So moving over to the plot of the piece, without giving away any of the twists or turns, I would say it's the first of a trilogy, but don't worry, guys, don't hang back from reading it, because you do actually land it in a place which has a sense of a very satisfying completion of this part of the adventure, with the threads going on for what would then develop in the rest of the world. So you don't leave it on that cliff edge, which is so frustrating, where you don't know what's going to happen. So you mentioned already that it deals with some real world issues of undocumented workers, but also there's an element about the AI sort of robot artificial intelligence approach that is coming at us. So when you're writing your plot, are you finding your plots in the real world? Like reading the newspaper and thinking, oh, yes, I think this is best looked at in the laboratory of a fantasy world? Or is it something, I mean, how does your plotting happen? If you
No.
can, it's hard to analyze this sometimes because you might just do it. But I'm sometimes aware when I'm writing stories that I've got some kind of overarching theme which I've seen in the real world. Like I wrote a book at the time of the banking crisis in 2008 where I thought, what would happen if the banking system collapsed in a fantasy world?
Mm.
That's where I started. I thought, this is
Amazing.
really interesting. Let's
Yeah.
look at it in this context. Because I hadn't read a book about the collapse of the banking system in a fantasy world because it's not a very sexy subject. But the
Yeah.
outworkings of it are.
Yeah.
So how do you go about finding your plots?
Amazing premise. Yeah, it must have been quite fun to research as well. It's quite organic. I'm very much someone who, if I know what's going to happen, I get bored, and all the life kind of goes out of the project, and I kind of, even if I force myself to sit down and write 1,000 words a day or whatever, it just doesn't sing, like it doesn't work. I just end up having to throw the whole thing away. So it's very discovery based, I think. It's more like I kind of go out into the world and experience lots of things that I find interesting, that I assemble kind of quite instinctually. Like I knew I was interested in young people and educational inequality and like the relationship between education and society. And yeah, various things sort of happened in my life as well. That was just sort of personal things that kind of feed into it. And then you sort of sit down, you're like, I need to write about all of these thoughts in my head. And then I just kind of honestly just sort of started doing that. So it comes from sort of theme and area again. But then the plot really comes out in the rewriting for me. I'm someone who rewrites and rewrites and rewrites and rewrites. Like, yeah, I know some people will just kind of like they'll be pay a huge amount of attention to each sentence, and then once the sentence is kind of locked in, it more or less stays where it is. Like no, like I don't know. I think we were on. I can't even remember. Draft 10 was the one I submitted to the publisher, but then I rewrote it about 12 times subsequently, and then we went through multiple drafts after, sort of including the copy edit. I think we went through 7 of those, so there were probably about like 35 drafts maybe. So it is.
Yeah, I think discovery writers often do that, don't they? I mean, I vary my technique depending what I've been asked to do by the publisher, because occasionally you'll get someone saying, "Can you please submit a synopsis?"
Yeah.
Hate that.
Yeah.
But I will do it if I think there's a contract at the end of
Yeah.
it. So that puts a bit of discipline on me in advance. But actually, what I enjoy most when I'm writing is just to see what happens. Yeah, but it does mean that you have to make sense of it at the end. And thank goodness for word processors.
I know, I do think about this, like, when people had to handwrite, like, what did they do? Like, obviously they managed it, but just the number of notebooks and the, I'd have to have scissors and glue and all sorts.
What you do is, because Tolkien, funnily enough, was a discovery writer, is that you end up with masses of posthumously published versions of your book by your son.
Yeah, and sort of tons and tons of kind of
Tons of
well-built.
versions where it's like
Yeah.
Trotter rather than Strider and all sorts of other things going on.
Yeah, and yeah, no, fascinating. And I think it took a very long time. I think isn't it Lord of the Rings was meant to be a sort of sequel to The Hobbit that just got like desperately
Yeah.
canned.
Well, you can tell, can't you? It starts as a kid's book.
Mhm.
And then by the time it's more or less when they first meet the Black Rider, suddenly, hang on a minute, we're in much darker territory here. Off we go.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. Love Lord of the Rings.
I've been, my daughter's, future husband is marrying into a family who all love Lord of the Rings. So he's valiantly reading his way through it for
Oh,
the first time. And I spoke to him at the weekend. I said, he's just finished book, fellowship. And I said, it changes, doesn't it? He said, oh, yeah, I'm enjoying it much more now, because he'd never got past that sort of jovial, party thing at the beginning, which was like The Hobbit. So I don't
Yeah.
think we're allowed to do that anymore because we've got word processors and we can.
True. I feel like the sort of people are a bit stricter with their expectations because
Yeah.
they're a bit like, well, why didn't you just go back through the Word document? You're a bit like,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
So you thinking about sort of plot and structuring, and you've mentioned that you do think of it as a sort of sort of anime type film. Studio Ghibli is the one I sort of think of when I think of Japan. Um, are you aware of using more like screenwriting structuring rules as you're writing as a result? You know, the classic sort of 3-act structure. Your book is in how many sections? Is it 5?
I think it's 5. Yeah, I'm writing the next one at the moment.
Yeah, it's 5, which
5.
is it's
Yep.
usually either 3 or 5 acts, isn't it, for
Yeah.
a screenplay?
Mhm.
Um, all is lost, you know, that stuff. Are you aware of that, or is it just something which, because you watch so much Disney and anime films, that
This
you
is
fall into as a storytelling instinct?
Well, the book is actually the dedication. I mean, it's all about teaching, so it's for my old teachers and for the students I taught. But it's written really in memory of my drama teacher who
Mm.
passed away a few years ago. And yeah, he only taught me for 2 years, but he had a sort of disproportionate influence, as you know, those as some kind of exceptional, talented, brilliant people do, especially teachers when you're kind of learning everything for the first time. They had a disproportionate influence on my kind of creative and intellectual development. So I still kind of use everything that he taught me kind of every day, really. And we did a lot of Shakespeare, like a lot of Shakespeare. um,
5 acts.
sorry, 5.
Shakespeare's 5 acts.
100%. So I think of everything in 5-act structure still, because I sort of embodied, you do A-level theatre studies, and I think I was in 10 plays in my A-level year, all with this sort of guy that just knew Shakespeare inside out and lived and breathed it. So it does. The 5-act structure comes from that, and I think like probably some of the scene setting and cuts and stuff probably do slightly organically come probably still from those plays, and also from the way we were using them. We had a quite just a really weird unconventional Hamlet that was really brilliant, called Hamlet House of Horror, that he devised, but we all kind of worked on together. That was a kind of German expressionist version of Hamlet, where we were kind of all on stage all the time, and it was a musical. There was Tom Waits music in it, and that had quite filmic cuts, and the way that the story moved, we kind of edited it to be like that. So I think that had a sort of, because you're sort of inside the creative process if you're devising in like a theatre context, and I think that's partly where that kind of came from. I was also just aware of writing for an audience, I think, because I had these books before. My like previous novels, quite sort of social realist, kind of longer form, just more traditional kind of chapters. And I just remember like seeing like my year nines and stuff, like trying to read it and like not always like just finding it a bit of a sort of harder thing to connect to. And I was just a bit like, oh, I want to give them something that they'll have a great time with, and that it's not an effort. That they like write something like that's like a gift to them. I'm saying that this like it's a teenage book. It's sort of, it's not really, it's for all ages, but
No, I think perhaps what you're talking about is a readership which actually thinks primarily in visual
yeah.
medium first before they think about literary medium. Because that's one, if someone said to me, "What's Naomi's style?" I'll say, well, it's the cut to.
Hmm.
So particularly at the end, or not, Act 4, shall we say, particularly in Act 4, when the pace of the action is building up and you've got sort of a number of conflicts or battle scenes or major decisions being made, you do the he reaches for the coffee pot, cut
Mm.
to what's happening over there, and then da 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 da, and then you come back to Theo with the coffee pot. So and that immediately is it's not so much a book thing, it's more of a film thing. And though books do that too, but it triggers a visual
Mm.
version of that. And I would say that was the style that came out of this book for me. It's interesting that you're saying it's very different from your earlier books.
Mhm.
Um, do you find, would you say that you're you have like a ventriloquist style in that you can become the writer for that kind of story and then change it if someone said, please write me I know, um, a whodunit thriller with an unreliable narrator, and you'd go, oh yes, I'll do that, and I'll go over there and do that. Are you quite happy to shift?
Hmm. That's an interesting question. I really struggle to write under contract, which is bad if you're trying to form like a career as a writer that is sustainable, because as you say, like a contract is important. But yeah, I find it very difficult to write anything to order, to be honest. And it's something I do really struggle with. Not sort of just like, it's not like on principle, it's just when I sit down and I know that there's a contract and I have to do it, everything comes out sort of awful, which is tough. But I think the voice does. Yeah, I do sort of think of the voice for the project. I think my earlier work was, because I wrote it all in my 20s. It was much more just kind of like how it came out. Like I was finding my voice, I guess.
You
Whereas
still look incredibly young to me. So are you now in your 30s then? Is that
34, yeah.
okay?
So
Still young.
useful, yeah,
Yeah.
kind of. Yeah, so I think, yeah, but it's very much sort of, I always see like what kind of tradition is this project within. So like my last
Mm.
novel I was reading, like it was more socially realist, again, themes about sort of injustice and land ownership and finding common ground between different social groups, and how like solidarity and connection between sort of marginalized communities is actually a way to sort of save society. And sort of moving from, it's a similar theme, so moving from an individualistic kind of framework of seeing things to something that's maybe more collectivist. So it's the same kind of agenda, but it was very much like I was reading a lot of I do like, I read like a lot of James Kelman, and like, I don't know, I was reading like Irvin Welsh. So this idea of like, it's not in the vernacular, but I wanted to write like how, well, I guess it is, but it's like South of England vernacular, which is sort of, is that even vernacular? But like, yeah, I was sort of like, I wanted to write something that was how people spoke. And it was very much kind of, that felt real in that sense. Yeah. So that it was, I was sort of trying to write a book that, in that kind of looking at how to do those things. Whereas with this, yeah, I think the voice, again, it came from my students, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose what you've just said makes me want to ask you about whether or not you've experienced any prejudice going from a more literary frame of, novel to working within a genre of fantasy. Have you noticed people treat you differently, reviewed by different kinds of people, or do you think we've got over ourselves?
Well, it's all very fresh. So the book isn't out yet. It's out on the 26th in the UK, the US, and other places, Japan.
26th of
26th of May,
May.
sorry, 2026.
May. Yeah, just
Yeah.
in case people are listening to this. It's probably out already if you're listening to this, folks.
Yeah. So I don't know how people are going to receive it. I don't know how they'll respond. But yeah, I used to work for an independent bookseller, and we didn't shelve things in genres. It was the whole idea
Yeah.
was just kind of fiction in general. So obviously there'd be like the history would have its own genre, or
Mm.
who would have its own genre. But like within fiction, there wasn't like crime, science fiction, fantasy, whatever. Like it was just, everything was fiction. And I think that had a very like formative impact on how I saw things. So I've been, and I've always read that way as well. Like I grew up reading a lot of
Yeah, I wish that we didn't get hung up about it, because I started writing for kids, and for many years I get people saying to me, "Oh, so you're writing for kids? Do you think you'll ever write for adults, or when are you going to start writing for adults?" As though I need you to kind of grow
Mm.
up. You're thinking, hang on,
It's not quite proper enough or something.
Yeah, and I
That's
have written for adults since, but I mean, it did
mm,
annoy me because it was all parts of the market are doing their own thing, and they have their own, respect. Um,
but and they're just as valuable. Like, I just think they're all stories. It's all literature. Like The Incredible, she's connected with Oxford actually. Catherine Rundle. I don't know if you know
oh,
her.
I know her. Yeah.
Yeah, she's wonderful. So Rooftoppers, The Explorer, the Impossible Creatures series. But yeah, those books, I think, yeah, like I used to teach adults for a bit. I gave sections of Rooftoppers to adults, and they connected with it. Like they were just like, what is this fantastic book? And I just think it's all kind of marketing. And
Well,
I
she
mean,
also wrote the critically acclaimed biography of John Donne.
well
So,
done, yes. But
she's an extraordinary person,
that
and
is a,
she's at All Souls, which is a fantasy location if ever there was one. It's
yeah.
a bizarre setting.
Written an essay which I haven't actually read yet, because I do read children's books. So very arrogantly, I was like, I don't need to read this. But it is, I think it's called "Why You Should Read Children's Books, Even Though You Are So Old and Wise." And I do
Good for her.
like very much agree with the sentiment. Yeah, and I think you can see between her John Donne biography and her children's books, you can really see the correspondence. I think that's almost like a study in why children's books are like, because she talks about Donne, like how joyous it is that like you can start reading a sentence or a line and it's the words and the meaning kind of just like twist out of your hands into something like completely unexpected and new and startling. And that is exactly what she does in all of her children's writing. Like every sentence like starts one way and like ends up with something kind of delightfully unexpected. And that's something children love because it's fun. You laugh. There's a sense of wonder and sort of surprise. But that's also what this Renaissance poet did, and sort of how she writes about him. So I think there's, like everything's much more connected with writing than than certain people would have us believe.
So moving away from the more serious questions, I had one silly question for you, which is, you might be able to explain to me, what is it about snacks? I noticed this in that K-pop Demon Hunter thing, where there's a lot of scenes at the beginning with them scoffing away at various noodle type snacks and things. And I noticed, I was reading through this, there was snacks were really important, whether or not people had access to snacks. Is there something that's passed me by? Or is there something from a Japanese perspective? I mean, K-pop Demon Hunters is Korean, isn't it? But what's going on?
I never really analysed this, to be honest. I just think snacks are very important. I think for me, it's a certain I think there's I feel like I have an impulse to include sort of a sense of coziness and a sense of sort of comfort and kind of joyousness in the book, in the story, even if it does look at some sort of quite tough themes and there are battles and things like that. I think it was important for me to sort of bring that sense of home and hope, partly because I wanted to sort of show what they were fighting for, and also just the wonder of these kids that had like built this like functional cozy family home for themselves despite not really having like a parent figure, and that's like a trope that's sort of as old as time in children's writing. It's old as the 19th century anyway. And yeah, so I think for me, the snacks sort of came from that, because like even when things are really sort of tough and they're going off on some like big revenge plot to like face down this gangster that murdered their adopted aunt, like you got to have your bag of rice crackers, like you got to have snacks.
Yeah, well, one of them takes a job in the kitchen. They say, you'll be okay, you're near the snacks,
Yeah, exactly. And I think that kind of it brings a sense of lightness and sort of that there is kind of humanness and joy, and that they are kind of human bodies in a space, even if it is an adventure. And it also aligns the characters with the readers or the watchers, the viewers, because often as you are reading or watching, you are eating snacks. So I feel like it's sort of like that it sort of creates a sense of companionship and sort of humanizing. And it sort of emphasizes that they're still sort of kids.
that's definitely true. Yeah. Okay, so I think we've galloped around the world of the Rainshadow Orphans. Do you have a title for the next book that you want to tell us?
No, I do have a working title, but it will probably. I always do the title last. I'm not very good at titles, so the working title is something to aim for, and then you change it to something that sounds good at the end.
So this one's out this month, and are you planning to bring the next one out at what point? A year's time, or?
At the moment, we're talking 2027, but it's still being written, so we will see how we go.
Yeah. But you're intending it to be within, fairly short time frame.
Yeah. But like we said, like it's very important to me that trilogies actually, like each book stands alone and each book finishes. Because I think it's sort of a cop out if you don't finish the story, because then you're just cheating, because it's hard to finish your story satisfyingly. Yeah. So yeah, it very much is. It makes sense as a book on its own, and that was very all my favorite trilogies do that. So
no, definitely. So to end, I want to ask you a question just to make your imagination fly away. And I always ask my guests where in all the fantasy worlds, not their own one, but all the others they've been delightfully exposed to over their lives, the best place for something that I've picked up in their work. And one of my favorite moments in your book is when Haru gets a dragon ride. And so we're imagining that we're on an Eastern style dragon. Where would you like to ride your dragon? Which fantasy world would you like to see from Dragonback?
Ooh.
It doesn't have to already have dragons. You're just, you can go there and just have a look at it on your dragon.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is maybe like Earthsea, Ursula K. Le Guin.
Oh, good choice. Yeah.
Magical archipelago. There are dragons, but not so much Eastern dragons. But yeah, I think that would be a wonderful one to explore. But I think with where the Eastern dragons come from as well. Like there's a lot of kind of like Chinese folklore and mythology, and sort of I looked at a lot of Japanese kind of yokai stories as well. So sort of within the sort of those sort of stories as well, I think could be just to be able to step inside some of these sort of traditions and sort of interact with the dragons within them, I think would be very very cool. Also, I'm obsessed with Avatar: The Last Airbender. I don't know if any you'll watch know that amazing series. So I would, any excuse to sort of soar over the Avatar world would be extremely welcome. Yeah.
Yes, I found myself thinking about all those fantasy maps that I've enjoyed looking at. So, I mean, the obvious thing is, it'd be great to fly over the map of Middle-earth, which we all sort of know from the films and from the books, and Narnia less so, but
it's very walking.
But still, it's a map that we all can think of. So I think for me, if I was going to pick one, it would be the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So the stuff that isn't on a map, just to see that. And see all a bit like you and the Ursula Le Guin Islands. It's just to sort of get how it all fits together, and seeing it from a dragon would be great fun.
Yeah, and there's sort of sense of the uncharted, like the undiscovered. Carpet again. That actually might be more appealing than sort of covering a map that we already have.
Yes, go off the edge.
Yeah,
give the dragons. Yeah,
exactly.
Thank you so much for being with us, and I wish you all the best for your book launch, and look forward to reading whatever the next one is going to be. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Mythmakers Podcast, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. Visit oxfordcenterforfantasy.org to join in the fun. Find out about our online courses, in-person stays in Oxford, plus visit our shop for great gifts. Tell a friend and subscribe wherever you find your favourite podcasts worldwide.